The first thing I want to say on this recording is that this training may be a little out of date, perhaps a month from now, when we know a little bit more about the primary election, the new districts, and whether or not that will affect the dates of the election. So caveat, if you're watching this in the future. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. If you have questions as we're going through, you can put them in the chat. I am not very good about being able to check the chat and also present at the same time. So I'll go through the chat at the end if you have questions, but feel free to unmute yourself and just shout out a question and interrupt me. Sometimes it's easier just to address the question and clear up any confusion while we're talking about the subject. So feel free to ask questions as we're going along. So what we're going to talk about today is who can vote, who's eligible to vote. Then we're going to talk about how to register voters, both using paper forms or online. We'll also talk about verifying voter registrations, which is something we do often when we are doing in-person voter registration events. And then we'll also talk about the different ways that you can vote in the election, which includes absentee ballot applications. That's usually a big topic, and we get a lot of questions about that. Then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about the primary election and some nonpartisan voting resources. So I put this slide up first to address the timing of voter registration. Most of you know that the legislative districts, the new maps are still tied up in court. Right. So we do not yet know what the legislative districts will be when people go to cast their ballots in the 2022 election. If it takes a while for the court to finalize the maps, or if it takes a while to get all the maps approved, there is the possibility that the primary election will be moved back, potentially to June. But again, that's something that hasn't been decided yet. So as we go through this training, I'm going to be using the current primary date of May 3rd and the current voter registration deadline of April 4th. However, this could easily be pushed back a month or more. Again, we're not sure. One of the big questions I think you will get when you're out there registering voters in 2022 is, I'm confused about which district I live in. I don't know how to find that information. The Ohio League is going to have some really handy QR code handouts that people can scan, and it will directly link them with a website where they can easily find their district. And we'll have, that website information as well, so you can give to people and look it up for them. But once that is available, once the districts are set, we will be getting that information out to you as soon as possible. And another thing I wanted to point out that Nazik from the Ohio League was talking about earlier today when we had an all-member Ohio League call was that the current district lines, so currently I live in the District 12 for Congress. My representative is Troy Balderson. That is still my district for 2022. So for all practical I was going to say for all practical purposes, but really Troy Balderson is my representative through 2022 until the election results have been tabulated and we start 2023. So the legislative district maps, which we are getting new for 2022, really only affect the elections, the voting. So when I go to vote, it's possible that on my ballot, it won't say District 12 anymore. Maybe it will say District 8, and Joyce Beatty may be one of the choices that I'm voting for. And currently Joyce Beatty is in District 3, which is, and I would never be voting for her. She would never be on my ballot. That's what I mean to say. Does that make sense to people? I feel like it's a little confusing to explain.
We don't know what the congressional districts are. So I guess I don't understand what you're saying. We
So
won't
what
know
I'm
until the Supreme
saying
Court
is,
rules.
yeah, so people may be confused about who their congressional representative is right now. And the answer is, for me, Troy Balderson, and he's gonna be my representative all the way through 2022. The maps that are tied up in litigation right now, those are really only used for purposes of voting ballots and elections in 2022. So my elected official won't change until 2023 when they've been voted into office.
Yeah, but I mean, everybody's got to scramble because we don't yet
Yes,
know.
correct.
Right.
But I just wanted to point out that you still have a representative in Congress. You know, you're still being represented by someone, even if
you don't know
sure what the future maps look like.
Right. Okay.
So some people may have questions about that.
Okay. No.
So
Whoever you have now is who you have. Right.
Yes, correct.
So this is just saying, just because they redraw the districts, who you have as a representative now doesn't change. I mean, it doesn't change until after it changes when you vote. It'll affect what district you vote in.
Right.
But you're going to keep the same representative until the new person that's voted is sworn in.
Yes.
Right.
That was a much more succinct way to put it. Thank you, Frank.
Good.
Okay, so let's get back to some information that is more constant, I guess. So who can vote? You must be a US citizen. You need to be an Ohio resident to vote in Ohio. You must be 18 by election day. That's going to be especially important during the primary election, because we can register 17-year-olds to vote as long as they are going to be 18 by November 8th of this year. So keep that in mind.
They could be 18 on the 8th, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That could be their birthday.
Yes, that could be their birthday. Yes, correct.
And then just because like 30 days. So 30 days. So somebody might be 31 days. So it has to be, we would want to know the date 30 days is, correct?
Well, I put this in parentheses because that's part of the statutory language, but I'm thinking I might just take it out for future presentations because it ends up confusing people, because the voter registration deadline is at least 30 days before the election. So if you're an Ohio resident and you registered to vote on the deadline to register, you will, and you just moved to Ohio that day, you will have been an Ohio resident for 30 days by election day.
Yeah, I understand.
Because of that gap between.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really.
So we would want to know that date though. Just because there could be people, one day short and they would not make it, right?
Well, because if they register to vote on, I guess the situation could come up where someone is planning to move to Ohio from Indiana.
Okay,
they register
the
to
deadline's
vote.
the 4th. Okay.
Yeah, correct. But we will be registering to people to vote in Ohio. So we don't have to worry about registering people outside of Ohio unless you're doing that on your own time.
Okay, I understand.
One of the most important and most misunderstood aspects about who can vote is that if you have a felony conviction, but you're not currently serving time in prison or jail, you are eligible to vote. And the reason this can be confusing is because states have a variety of different rules on this. So other states may say, if you have a felony conviction, your right to vote is forfeited forever. That's not the case in Ohio. The one caveat is that if you have a felony conviction and you served time in jail, you were automatically taken off the voter rolls. So when you get out of prison or jail, you will need to re-register to vote.
Sure.
You
Gotcha.
will no longer be on the rolls.
Okay.
And that comes up pretty often when you're talking to people out in the community. Just so I want to make sure everyone's clear on that.
Mhm.
Next, I want to talk a little bit about some specific populations that have just some different needs or questions that may come up. Occasionally, we do voter registration drives at homeless shelters or churches that serve free lunch, and we try and register transient or homeless individuals. This can be a little challenging, but you do not have to have a permanent address to vote. Most homeless shelters and local community organizations that help serve homeless individuals will accept mail on their behalf, so you can use that organization's address on the voter registration form. The ID requirements can be a little tricky sometimes, or I would say often, people that are homeless have trouble getting the required ID to vote on election day, which would be a driver's license or a state ID. There's a whole list of voter ID. You can talk to them about voting early in person or absentee voting because it doesn't require a physical ID. The downsides of that is that there's just a little more legwork involved in terms of getting to the early vote location or dealing with an additional application for an absentee ballot and then mailing that back and getting correspondence back and forth. So, but if they do choose to do early in-person voting or absentee mail voting, all they need for ID is their date of birth and the last 4 digits of their social security number. Okay, registering college students. We have a nice little video, 3-minute video about registering college students that I will send out in my follow-up notes. But the main thing to remember is that students can choose whether to register at their home address or their campus address. And I'm saying home address to mean where their family, their parents, or their caregivers live. They can update their address or change their address every year or every election if they choose to do so. So if you're registering college students, you'll want to make that clear. If they have parents that live in Cleveland, would they prefer to vote on Cleveland local issues, Cleveland City Council members, or would they prefer to register, for example, if they're going to Ohio State University, would they prefer to register on their campus address and vote for Columbus-based issues and candidates? Their address on their driver's license does not need to match their campus address, and where they registered to vote will not affect any kind of federal financial aid based on that. So any questions about special populations or additional special populations that I might be able to answer?
I think, Elizabeth, this is Barbara,
Hi, Barbara.
that once I was registering students at Otterbein, and one of the things, somebody that I was working with as another volunteer at the table, the way they put the question to the students, they said, well, you know, if your parents live in Mansfield, but you're living in the dorm here in Westerville and going to Otterbein, would you prefer to vote at home so you can vote on the school issues, you know, at home? Or would you prefer to vote for the issues that are here local in Westerville? And a lot of the students said, oh, I want to vote for, you know, the issues at home because they were more familiar with their high school. They had just left.
Yeah,
so
I think
forth.
that
So I thought that was really effective, but we could still, I think we could still register them. It's
Yes.
just that you know, their registration would be sent to Richland County, you know, for Mansfield, for
Correct.
instance.
Yes. So
Okay.
that is a great segue
Mhm.
to the next few slides, because the next few slides I have broken up enlarged photos of what the Ohio voter registration form looks like.
Mhm.
And when we are out registering voters, we can register anyone who lives in Ohio. So it doesn't matter what county they live in. We can register anyone using this form, and then we just send it to the individual county boards of elections. So the first part of the form asks if you're a citizen or if you will be 18 years of age on or before the next general election. A lot of people tend to skip this, even though it's bolded and kind of put in a box. But we want to make sure that people answer those questions, because sometimes the Board of Elections doesn't have to accept it if it's the form, if those two questions aren't answered. The remaining questions are their people's names, their address, birth date, and then box 10, your Ohio driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social. The middle part of the form, and this is all part of the same form, is where you would either update your address or update your name. So this form is not only for first-time voters, but it's for anyone who wants to update their information with the Board of Elections. So if you've moved, you want to use this form to let the board know that you have moved and what your new address is. And then also if you've had a name change, like you were divorced or you got married or any other reason that you changed your name, you would want to use this form as well. Then finally, at the bottom of the form, you need to put today's date, the day you registered to vote, and then your signature. And the signature needs to fit inside that dotted line box, because the board scans these forms, and somehow if your signature isn't in the box, it gets cut off. And they use the signature to match you in the poll books when you go and vote on election day. So it's important that people keep that signature in the box. And this all seems quite simple, and it is quite simple. But we have a lot of errors on these forms when we do voter registration drives. And part of it is, you know, many times we are out at community festivals, there's lots of distractions. You as the volunteer are chatting with the person who's filling out the form. It's very easy to make some mistakes. So I like to go over the form, have the voter wait just a minute after they completed it to make sure that everything is filled out properly. Some common errors can be that people list the county that they live in, not the, or that they list the country, United States, instead of the county in the county box. There can be some problems with dates. And then also we can't accept PO boxes on this form. It has to be a physical mailing address. And that reason is because the Board of Elections uses this form to assign you a polling location. And if you just put a PO box, they don't know what polling location to assign you. Finally, the Board of Elections has a lot of work to interpret many of these voter registration forms. So please encourage people to write legibly, because if the staff at the Board of Elections can't read it, then they'll either put it in incorrectly or they will kind of refuse to accept it because they can't read it. So what happens next after you register someone to vote? They can either take that form and turn it in themselves to the Board of Elections or mail it in, or the rule is if you are returning someone else's forms, they must be returned 10 days after the registration form is completed, or by the voter registration deadline, whichever one is earlier. And you can return those to the Board of Elections office in Franklin County. I have the address here, or the Secretary of State's office. Now I'm giving this general information because I know some people are interested in going out and registering voters on your own, and you're completely welcome to do that. If you sign up to volunteer at a League of Women Voters voter registration event, you will be collecting the completed voter registration forms and turning them into me. And then it will be my job to make sure that they get to the Board of Elections by the deadline. So that's generally how it works with the League.
I have a question about that a second.
Sure.
Elizabeth, can you go back to that slide for a minute, please? The first bullet point, it must be returned 10 days after the registration form is completed, or within 10 days of the registration form being completed?
Within 10 days of the registration form.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't hold it until 10 days
No, no, no,
after?
no, no.
Okay, that's what
as
it
soon as
looked
I
like
get
to
them, I
me. So I'm
turn them
thinking,
in.
okay, wait, what? Okay, thank you.
You have
Sorry.
10 days, yes.
Within 10 days of the form completed.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
So after you register someone to vote, you're going to want to let them know what to expect next. And if you take their form and you're going to turn it in for them, or you're going to get it to me and I'm going to turn it in for them, they can expect that within 20 business days, and remember those 20 business days, we're talking almost a month of receiving the voter registration form, the Board of Elections will notify the voter by mail that they're registered, where their polling location is, ID requirements for voting, and some other details about the upcoming election. Okay, so we just walked through the whole process of registering someone to vote using a paper form. But you can also register to vote online. The process or the questions that are asked are pretty much the same as what we just went over with the paper form. But starting in 2017, you can register to vote online at the Secretary of State's website. You will need to use your date of birth and the last 4 digits of your social in order to process online registration, or you can also update your address or your name using this form. So it's very easy to use. We do give out this web address when we are doing voter registration events for the League. I also find that often it is easier to just use the forms when we're doing a voter registration event. For one thing, it's easier to check over and make sure there aren't any errors. And for another thing, we're going to be turning in the forms for them. So for the voter, it makes it a lot easier. But when we're doing social media campaigns, we always push online voter registration. The only instance in which you would have to use a paper registration form instead of online voter registration is for voters that have no previous presence in Ohio. So for example, if you just moved to Ohio from Montana and you have never paid Ohio taxes and you've never had an Ohio driver's license, you've never interacted with the government of Ohio at all, you're not going to have an online presence in the state of Ohio's many different agencies. So in that case, you would have to fill out a paper voter registration form and get that turned into the Board of Elections. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
So because I was thinking of that you had to have either a state ID or a state driver's license in order to use the online option.
No, you can use your date of birth and just the last 4 digits of your social.
Doesn't matter that you're not already in the, don't already have, you're not in the state system.
Well, if you're not in the state system, and that can be, there can be many ways to be in the state system.
Not just the driver's license
Not
and the
just the
state
driver's
ID.
license, but it can be like paying it can be through taxes, it can be, through, getting a hunting license, it can be, many different ways.
Okay, all
If
right.
someone isn't sure though, whether or not they have a presence in the Ohio online system, I would definitely just recommend having them fill out a paper form just to be safe.
Okay.
One topic I always like to touch on are voter purges. The Ohio Secretary of State, every once in a while, like once every 18 months to 2 years, does a purge of the voter files. The last purge happened in January 2021, and 98,000 Ohioans were taken off the voter rolls. Now, the league always follows this very carefully. We try and go through that list of purge voters to make sure that everyone that was taken off the list was taken off for valid reasons. And there are many valid reasons to be taken off the voter rolls. It can be that someone has moved, that they've passed away. So there's many reasons why you would need to be taken off the voter rolls. However, there have been some problems in the past with people being taken off the voter rolls that were not supposed to be taken off. So that's something we always want to watch out for. And that is a great segue into why we push verifying voter registration status at our voter registration events. The kind of intro line that I encourage our volunteers to use when they are doing voter registration, instead of saying, hey, are you registered to vote? Most people just say yes and kind of walk away. But if you start off by saying, have you checked your voter registration lately? Some people may still ignore you, but most people, that'll make them stop and think, oh, I don't know if I've checked it recently. And this is a very easy tool. You can quickly check someone's voter registration status. This is the website, and all it needs is your first name, your last name, and your county. So if I put in my information, Elizabeth Grieser in Franklin County, I have a fairly uncommon last name. So there's only one Elizabeth Grieser living in Franklin County. It will pull up my name with an address listed underneath it. And so if you were helping me check my voter registration, you would say, oh, I see you live at 123 Main Street. And then if I said, oh, no, that was where I lived 2 years ago, then you know that someone needs to fill out a new voter registration form to update their registration. If it's the correct address, then they're all set to go. If nothing comes up when you put in someone's name and county, then that means that they're not in the system. They've either been purged for inactivity, or they have never registered to vote to begin with. Okay. So now we're going to get into the different voting options for 2021. At League voter registration events, we like to do more than just register voters. So after you've registered someone to vote or updated their address, then if they're willing to talk to you for a little bit more, you can ask them what their voting plan is for the upcoming election. We want to ask them how they're planning to vote. Are you going to go to your polling location on election day, which currently is May 3rd, and then I have how long the polls are open for. The second option is that the person can vote early in person beginning April 5th. That is only, I have a spelling error here, but that's only at the Board of Elections office on 1700 Morse Road. And they are generally open business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. the last 2 weekends before the election day, they usually have some weekend hours. And then the third option is to do absentee mail-in voting, which also starts April 5th. And if you take that option, your ballot must be postmarked by May 2nd. And I have a little bit more information about absentee ballots because that has become a very popular way to vote, especially given COVID, that this has become much more popular. So in Ohio, for the primary election, you will have to request an absentee ballot. And you have to do that using a paper form. It needs to be filled out and mailed to the Board of Elections. This is not something you can request online. Sometimes before the general election, the Ohio Secretary of State's office will mail out an absentee ballot request form to all registered voters. I do expect them to do that this fall for the general election, but they will not be doing that for the primary election. So when you're registering someone to vote, that's also a great time to ask them if they expect to vote absentee. And if they do, you can go ahead and help them fill out an absentee ballot request form and turn both forms in together. So once someone has turned in an absentee ballot request form, which looks like this, it'll have most of the same questions that someone just answered on the voter registration form. You can send this, for section 3, section 3, you have to put the address in which you're registered to vote. And then section 4 is where you want the ballot sent to. So you don't have to have it sent to the address that you're registered to vote at. You can have it sent out of state, wherever you're going to be during the election. For box 6, you want to check the primary election. And this is where you will have to request either a party ballot or an issues only ballot. So you'd request either a Democrat ballot, a Republican ballot, or an issues only ballot. There will be no candidate races on that ballot. It will be issues only. And then you sign it and you mail it or turn it in to the Board of Elections. Okay, so in 2020, during the general election, I had a lot of questions about how to make sure that your absentee ballot application got into the Board of Elections correctly. How do people know where they are in the process? The Franklin County Board of Elections has a really great tracking tool, which is pretty much like tracking an Amazon package. You do have to go in and sign up for it, and this is the link to how to get there. But it will send you a text or an email every time something happens along the absentee ballot process. So it will send you a text when your application is received by the Board of Elections. You'll get another text or email when your ballot has been mailed out to you. And then after you fill out your ballot and send it back into the Board of Elections, you'll receive a final text saying that they've received it and they've processed it. So I think that helps voters feel a little more comfortable with this process of knowing where they are in the voting process. Okay. So now we talked about the different ways you can vote. I'm going to transition a little bit more into what's on the ballot for the primary election. We know generally, but we don't know the full list of candidates or the issues because the candidate registration deadline has not passed yet. So I don't have a lot of details for this, but there will be the Ohio governor's race, the US Senate race to replace Rob Portman, US representatives to Congress. We'll be electing Ohio legislators for the House and Senate. For countywide races, we'll be electing Franklin County Commissioner, Franklin County Auditor, and then we have judicial races of various levels. Not all of these races will be on the primary ballot. To be on the primary ballot, there has to be at least 2 candidates from the same party running against each other. So for example, and I don't know this for sure, I'm making this up, Franklin County Auditor, if there's only 1 Democrat running and 1 Republican running that's filed this spring, the Franklin County Auditor race will not be on the primary election ballot. There won't be a space for it. We'll just vote on that in the general election.
Mhm.
Does anyone have questions about what's going to be on the primary ballot? I know there's not a lot of details to give at this point, but. Okay, so since we know more information about that, I will be updating that. Oop. Political party enrollment. Sometimes you will have voters that ask you how they can change their political party enrollment, or ask why they keep getting all this partisan information from one party mailed to them. In Ohio, there is no official political party enrollment, but your voting record is public. So if you have voted Republican on the last few primary elections, if you've requested a Republican ballot, the parties know how to go in and get your public information, and they can see that, and then you get on the mailing list. So sometimes people are confused about how that happens. You want to make sure that you're being clear with voters when they're voting in the primary election that they will only be voting on one party's candidate. So they'll either request a Democrat ballot and they will only be voting on which Democrat they prefer, or if they select the Republican ballot, they will only be voting on Republicans and they will select their preferred Republican. Any questions on like primaries and how that works? Different states have different versions of primaries. Some are called open and some are closed. Some states have processes in which you can select multiple candidates. So every state's a little different. Okay. Just to make things a little more complicated, I put in some related and upcoming issues that people may ask you about, even though they're not directly related to the primary election in 2022. One is that Columbus City Council just finished its districting process for the first time. It increased from a 7 to 9 seat council, and now they will each have their separate districts. So in 2021, there was a whole process which Columbus City Council had a group submit a number of maps to district into 9 different districts. One was selected, and we now have a new map for Columbus City Council. That is available on their website. That will not, those maps are approved, but that will not really go into effect until 2023 because Columbus City Council is not on the ballot at all for 2022. But people may ask about Columbus City Council, what district they now live in, things like that. So I just wanted to bring that up as a potential question that you may be getting when you're out registering people to vote. We also have some pending voting legislation in the Ohio legislature. It is a mixed bag of a few things we would like to see, which include online absentee ballot requests. As you remember, we just discussed, right now you have to fill out a paper form and mail that in. But it also does some things that we would consider to be harmful to voters and restrict the vote, which would include not being able to have multiple drop boxes in counties, and the drop box would have to be placed at the Board of Elections office. So I, don't want to get into too many details about this, right? This legislation has not been moving for a while. Some of that's because the legislature is busy with redistricting. We don't know what's going to happen with this in the future, but that is still hanging out there as a potential voter rights piece of legislation. The league is following that. Okay, on to get out the vote resources. This is the list of nonpartisan voter resources. If you do voter registration drives with the league, you will be provided with hard copies of, when possible, of this information. Vote 411 is the League of Women Voters site, which houses all of our candidate and issue guides. This is a really great tool because you can put in your address and it will pull up a list of candidates and issues that will be on your ballot specific to your address. And then it will have candidate responses to questions that we've asked them, plus all their contact information. Now, right now, if you go to Vote 411 and put in your address, nothing will come up because we don't know who the candidates are yet. So this is more relevant as we get closer to the election. I expect to have this site up by April 1st. Of course, this is dependent on us keeping the same voter registration deadline and primary election date. We also have some voter information sheets which talk a lot about special voting populations: homeless, people with felony convictions, new Americans, voters with disabilities, student voters, provisional ballots, and talking about why should people vote. We have, oh, I put this last bullet point here because this was talked about on a call I was on today, and I thought that I would put that in. The Ohio Debate Commission, which is a partner organization of the league, is hosting some statewide candidate debates on March 28th and 29th. That is going to be at Central State University, but it will be televised and online, and they will be doing debates, 4 debates, 2 for the governor, being the Republican candidate debate, Democrat candidate debate, and then 2 for the US Senate race, the Democrat and the Republicans. And those will be really great resources to hear unscripted answers from candidates. And we will be helping the Ohio Debate Commission collect some questions that they will be using at those debates. Our best GOTV resource when you are out at an in-person event is the Voting 123 cards. This is the 2020 version because we have not made our 2022 version, given that the dates are still so subject to change. But this is a postcard size piece of material that we hand out to pretty much anyone that we can get to take it. It has all of the relevant dates, early voting hours. It has a list of voter resources. It talks about ID for voting and the different ways that you can vote. So this is kind of our one size fits all piece of information. Another thing that we like to talk about when we talk about get out the vote resources is election protection. This is a nonpartisan coalition. It's a national group. It provides a toll-free hotline for voting information, and it does so in various languages. We are trying to get this information out as broadly as we can during voter registration events and all the way up to the election, that if someone has problems voting, if they're turned away from their polling location and told they can't vote or that they have to vote provisionally and they don't think that's correct, they need to call this number and support it and report it. One of the ways that the league and other voting rights organizations are able to track trends and problems with voting that comes up in our communities is when people call in this number and say, hey, I tried to vote and they told me that I couldn't, but I brought all the correct ID, or whatever it is. So we have some materials with this information on it, and we encourage you as volunteers to please hand this out. Okay, I had some frequently asked questions to remind me to cover these topics if I forgot. You do not have to register for every election. Occasionally we will have people say, I don't want to register to vote because then I'm going to be on the list for jury duty. And the response to that is, if you pay taxes or you have a driver's license, you're already on the list for jury duty. So registering to vote won't change that. Okay, I think I answered the student one, and the homeless transient voter question. Let's see. For voters with disabilities, there are all kinds of accommodations they can have depending on their disability. Ohio Disability Rights is an organization that's based in downtown Columbus, and they have extremely comprehensive resources on voting with the disability. So we have a kind of like small handout that we have available at our voter registration events. But if someone has questions about a very specific disability and what kind of accommodations they are afforded, we can get them in touch with Ohio Disability Rights. And then let's see, this one we answered. This is a good one. So if someone is filling out the form and they hand it to you and they walk away and you realize, oh, they forgot to put in today's date, I'm just going to add it. You are not allowed to add anything to the voter registration form if the voter is not there. However, if the voter is there and if they're not able to write, if they are more comfortable with having you fill it out, you can fill out the form for them. However, they will have to sign the form. And then something to be aware of when you're out there registering voters is that you cannot offer anything of value in exchange for voter registration. So for example, if you are at a table and you have donuts available, you have to give them to anyone. You have to offer a donut to anyone who asks for one. You can't say, no, you can only have a donut if you register to vote. So it may seem like a very small thing, but we always try and follow the rules when it comes to this. We don't want to get in trouble. And a more relevant example would actually be stamps. So if someone wants to fill out an absentee ballot request form and you wanted to give out stamps so they could mail that in, or you wanted to give them an extra stamp so that when the ballot came in the mail, they could have a stamp to mail that back into the Board of Elections. That's a little bit of a gray area, whether or not we're allowed to give out stamps as something of value. So just something to consider. Okay. So if you're interested in getting involved with the league or just getting involved more with voting efforts, there's many, many ways to do that. If you're interested in seeing what's out there, you can sign up for our Monday morning weekly email. Many of you are already on this list, but if you're not and you're interested in signing up for this email, you can put your email in the chat and I'll make sure you get signed up for that. I think the most important thing that you can do if you're able to volunteer for an entire day is to sign up to be an election day poll worker. And you do that through the Franklin County Board of Elections. Our election system is built on this whole idea that we will have, I'm going to call them volunteers, even though you get paid a nominal amount, election day poll workers to make sure that our elections run smoothly. And they're, one-day workers that work 1 or 2 days a year. So if you're able to do that, they are always looking for new volunteers. In Franklin County for a general election, they need about 5,500 poll workers. You can also volunteer to do election protection efforts. The league gets involved with this. We have poll monitors at early vote to answer people's questions. And also just make sure that things are going smoothly, that if there's any problems at the Board of Elections or at the poll site, that we are there to help out with that. And then we will be having many voter registration opportunities we are planning a big voter outreach week, the week of March 21st. We're partnering with WOSU, the Columbus Libraries, OSU Votes, Capital University, Columbus State, in order to have a week where we are registering voters as much as we can and getting out voter information. WOSU is going to be our media partner and help us get the word out about voting. So we'll be looking for volunteers to register voters that week. I will have more information about that in the Monday morning email.
Okay.
Okay, and this is my contact information, but I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay. Hey, 7:54, did pretty good. Let's see, I'm going to check the chat. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't think so.
Hey, Lindsay. Go ahead.
How many people does the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus register in a typical year?
I would say we register between like 500 and 700 people every year.
Okay.
And that probably sounds pretty low. Before I started this job, I kind of thought when I would go out to do voter registration that, oh, he's over there, that I would just have like, like people coming up to me all the time, wanting to register to vote. So, but it's a little slower than that. I think a lot of what we do that's helpful for voter registration is actually answer people's questions, because people have a lot of questions about voting now. People are more unsure than ever about the security of elections, about how the process works, about absentee voting. So that information that we provide is really essential. And also, I say between, I say 500 voters because that's the paper voter registration forms that I have. I don't know, sometimes it's hard to know, especially if you're doing online voter registration, how many voter registrations can be attributed to someone talking to a league member. But yes, we are always looking for ways to register new voters, to reach new communities. And I will add that I have a list of organizations that I work with to host voter registration. But if you all have ideas about organizations, or you have contacts in different organizations, we rely on volunteers to help us increase our spread, because we are grassroots. So I'm always happy to take suggestions. Let's see.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, well, I will be sending out a recording as well as the slides and a few follow-up links tomorrow morning. Feel free to pass this on to anyone. This training is for any community member that wants to register voters. They don't have to be affiliated with the league. We just want to offer kind of best practices to anyone who's out there registering.
Okay.
So,
Great. Thank you.
with that, stay warm. It's going to be icy
Hey,
and
thanks,
rainy.
Elizabeth.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much, Elizabeth.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.
Alrighty.